Hello, so in this video we're going to take a look at how to write effective references for university applications. Now I realise that writing effective university references and the process of repeatedly writing information to support student applications, especially when you've got loads to do, isn't anyone's preferred pastime, perhaps after school or at a weekend, but it constitutes a really important part of the university application form. So for the students, it's really important that teachers and advisors know how to get the process right. For the last 7 years or so, I've been working in university outreach teams, both for modern universities, post-92 institutions, and research intensive universities, Russell Group institutions as well. During that time, I have presented CPD sessions for teachers and advisors on writing an effective UCAS reference at schools and colleges around the country and at the Russell Group Teachers and Advisors Conference. So I thought for this video, what I could do was adapt one of the presentations that I've delivered and share it for you online. You'll notice during the presentation that I've removed all of the references with regards to specific institutions or specific names of academics and teachers and advisors. This isn't because I fabricated them, they are real, but as I'm now an independent operative, if you like, then it was necessary for me to remove those. The presentation is quite long, but hopefully off the back of it you'll get a really good understanding of what's involved, both with writing applications, what needs to be on the forms, and also how to structure the reference so it best complements the application and perhaps the personal statement the student has written as well. So without further ado, let's get to it. So in the presentation we'll cover the purpose of an academic reference, we'll take a look at what academics say about the references that they receive, how to handle predicted grades, how to structure a good reference, preparation for reference writing, and some common concerns that teachers and advisors have. So what's the job of an academic reference for a university application? Well, three things really. It firstly provides academic predictions about the student's potential to achieve exam results. It contextualises achievement and it endorses an applicant. So essentially what it does is backs up the things that the applicant may be saying about themselves. So are references important? Well, the short answer is yes. Yes, they are an incredibly important part of the UCAS application process. But don't just take my word for it. What I've got on the next slide is some quotes from admissions tutors about what they think. So the reference is the first thing that I look at. The reference is extremely important to assess whether an applicant has what it takes to succeed on a difficult course. The reference can be useful if academic skills are described, so useful if the reference is used as an opportunity to demonstrate the skills that the student has that's going to be useful for that specific course. And it can be incredibly useful or very useful if it's not a standard applicant or there's an odd choice of A-levels. For example, it might be if there was a false start by the student, they did 3 A-levels in year 12 that weren't right for them, so they perhaps repeated the year and changed their mind with a different combination. One academic in particular said we would not make an offer to a student with a poor reference. In particular, we use the teacher's reference to help us decide the borderline cases. So really, a strong academic reference can be the difference between the student perhaps getting an offer on the course and the student not receiving one. So what should be included in a reference? Well, firstly, the student's predicted grades should definitely be there, what they are likely to attain in their A-levels or their BTEC. There should be contextual information about the school that the student goes to as well. Increasingly, with regards to widening access to higher education, then a school-based information can provide the grounds perhaps for a contextual offer to some students where they might get a lower grade offer based on the demographic of students at the school that are achieving, say, 5 grade A to C at GCSEs, etc., etc. So really important. If appropriate, then it's going to be important to include personal circumstances or information, if there's been disruption to studies, if the student's a young carer, if they've perhaps had obstacles that they've had to overcome that may contextualise some of the academic predictions that they've got around grades. That would be incredibly important. Universities would want to see a reflection on the academic achievement of the students, first of all, but also on the potential of that student from subject teachers. It would also be really useful in the reference to include a reflection on the student's commitment to or the research that they've done independently into the subject area as well. Remember, at university, the student's probably only going to be selecting one subject, maybe two at most, so it's going to be very, very important that they demonstrate a personal commitment and interest and passion for that subject. Admissions tutors would want to see a reflection on personal attributes as well. So whether it be a contribution to the school community or extracurricular activity that the student has engaged in. The best stuff for references is really the stuff that's super curricular. And what I mean by super curricular is additional activity that the student's taken, perhaps in an extracurricular capacity, that directly relates to the subject that they want to apply for. So if you've got any information regarding students' activity that is directly linked to the subject, then that's always great to include as well. The last thing that the reference should include is a recommendation for the course that the student wants to study, or for university, higher education in general. As I say, if you can, on the reference, avoid mentioning specific universities. What we want to see is evidence of preparation for higher education more generally. So when you're making grade predictions for the students, it's important, firstly, to consider the context in which you're making them. Secondly, that they're realistic, and thirdly, that they're reflective of the potential of the student. So here's a quote from an admissions tutor of Russell Group University talking about the references. Firstly, they're saying that it's important that these are accurate and well written and unique and about the individual, saying quite often it's the case, not always, but quite often, that the only difference with references is the name of the person being described in the reference, and all of the other stuff is the same. And usually every single person within those references are outstanding and unique. If you are making predicted grades for a student that are very, very different from the grades perhaps that they've achieved at GCSE and AS level, or in mock exams at the end of year 12, then it's going to be really, really important to contextualise them. The admissions tutor here says that sometimes they'll have students that have got C, D, D, E at AS level, but they're being predicted 3 A's with no contextual information about why the student would suddenly make that jump from being C, D, E at AS to 3 A's at A level. It's really important for admissions tutors to be able to contextualise that information. If they just receive it and you're making these claims without any good reason, then it's going to be very, very difficult for the case to be made as effectively as it otherwise could be. So school context, what are admissions tutors looking for? Well, firstly, a short introduction about the school, both its intake, like I mentioned before, the types of students that typically attend, and the school environment where it's located in terms of the locality, etc., etc. If it's appropriate as well, then comment on the subject availability. For instance, if you're a school that doesn't offer biology or physics at A level, then it may be appropriate to comment upon that within the reference. Also, comment on the school policy as well. So we've got a couple of examples here. The first one is talking about a school that's an open access publicly funded sixth form college. With that, then they have 75 students that were in receipt of a 16 to 19 bursary and or free school meals due to low parental income. So that's really important contextual information for universities to know, because it may be that it flags up to some of the indicators with regards to contextual offer making and widening participation. The second one, X school has adopted a linear approach to teaching A level. So what their school is doing in that particular example is contextualizing why they have made a decision perhaps not to offer AS levels and use mock examinations at the end of year 12 instead. I say all really, really important information for universities to know. Next, you're going to be talking about personal circumstances and context. So this changes focus from the more broad information about the school down to the granular level information about the individual. So here we'd want to see an explanation, perhaps if a pupil has succeeded despite difficult personal circumstances, something that I mentioned before. They'd also want to see an explanation, perhaps if attainment doesn't reflect potential because of particular circumstances, it would be really, really useful to include these early in the reference, because then all of the information that follows can be contextualised by that early evidence. You also want to contextualise anything that's going to stand out as something that seems perhaps a little bit unusual at this stage as well. So here's another example. This one is talking about maths and chemistry teachers being disappointed for a student as they only missed out on an A by a matter of 1 or 2%. And it goes on to say that these were achieved in extremely difficult circumstances, with this particular young lady being a young carer and taking a huge role in caring for her brother, etc., etc. So that's an example of where the contextual information has been used effectively to make a case or an argument, perhaps for grades that are slightly lower than expected. Within the reference, academic performance should definitely be included as well. It should be included for each of the different subjects that the student's taking, but with a greater focus on the relevant subjects to their particular application. And the referee is going to want to make comments upon these things in tandem with the personal statement. Remember that the reference is being written to reinforce the rest of the application. So perhaps if the student mentions 2 or 3 attributes that are directly relevant and evidences them well within the personal statement to the course that they're applying for, it might be that the reference focuses on another couple of areas which are particularly important that perhaps the student, due to space restrictions, has omitted from their personal statement. These don't necessarily have to be related to a specific subject. They can be related to study in higher education more generally, and if you can extract material from a number of tutors perhaps and cover them together, then it really reinforces the message that you're trying to give about the suitability of the student for the course. So here again we have another couple of quotes. Both of them are speaking about physics and students that are making perhaps an application to university in those types of areas. However, you can really see the difference between the two statements and how the second one really digs deeper into the knowledge, skills and experience that the students got that makes them a great applicant for the course. Perhaps the first one might be really useful if you're just speaking about the subject in general and it's not a subject that the student's applying for. However, the second one is what you may perhaps be wanting to emulate if the student is making an application for that course specifically. So it's going to be massively important to refer to the subject that the student's applying for, and these can be in 2 contexts. It might be an academic subject where you are speaking a lot about the student's particular interest in their choice of subjects that they want to study, or it could be a vocational course, things like medicine, nursing, engineering, where you may be talking about the skills that are more related to the job that the student may go into post-university or their specific career goals or aspirations. And here we've got 2 different examples again. So the first one is talking about the ability of the student to secure work experience to enhance their knowledge and skills about the area that they want to go into, whilst the second one is speaking more about language as a subject and again the passion and the enthusiasm for the subject. The reference isn't just focused on the academic though. Personal attributes and skills that the students have are going to be really important to evidence too. And these can be drawn from a range of examples. So it might be positions of responsibility that the students held within the school. It might be outstanding non-academic achievements that the student has made. I don't know whether it be something along the lines of representing the county or the country, a particular sport, or getting to the national finals in a debating society event, for example. Those things would be really useful to mention. Could be drawing from part-time work, examples where they have evidenced excellent time management, or areas where they've got real potential to make a valuable contribution to the university community more widely as well. So this particular example, I would say, is a little bit over the top. X is an outstanding young man. Were I to pour out a stream of superlatives, it would be no more, no less than he deserves. He is this year's head prefect. I can only say that it is an exceptional year group, and yet he has stood out.
He has a buoyancy and energy and a natural sense of care for others that make it a privilege to know him. It's important to evidence the attributes that the student has and the contribution that they can make to the university community. However, doing it in such a manner as this is perhaps a little bit over the top, and it's going to appear a little bit over the top to admissions tutors too. So let's take a look at one of these quotes. X is someone of whom we are very proud. She is an exceptionally hardworking and committed pupil who is popular with both staff and students and has gained their respect for her friendly and responsible attitude. She has an excellent record of attendance and punctuality. She is mature, well motivated and conscientious, as well as being meticulous in her organisation of herself and her studies. So there, it's singing the students' praises, but within limits. It's sticking to evidence, sticking to the fact. When you are finishing the reference, it's a good idea to end with a recommendation. Essentially, the recommendation might be 1 or 2 sentences where you are just tying a little bow around the application, ready for the admissions tutor to put it in their offer pile. So if we've got an example here, it might be something along the lines of, in short, X has the markings of an excellent undergraduate and I have no hesitation giving her the highest recommendation. Just something to nicely surmise all of the information that you've given both on the school and the student themselves to reinforce all of the valuable information that you've given to the admissions tutors. So, preparation. What steps should you put in place before getting started on writing the reference? Well, firstly, it's worth considering who should write the reference. Would it be for a particular student that it would be best coming from a particular subject tutor or their form tutor, or perhaps somebody that's slightly different who knows the student better due to a personal relationship? Always talk to the student before writing the reference as well. That's incredibly important. You want to be able to work together with their personal statement to contextualize all of the information that you're giving and work in tandem. The best way to do that, especially if it's with a student that you're not familiar, is have a quick 5-minute chat with them prior to writing the reference. It's going to be really important to liaise with the subject teachers for relevant information as well. So if you are not somebody that has much contact with the student other than, say, form time, then get statements from subject teachers that outline some of those skills and experiences that the admissions tutors are going to be looking for. It's also worth researching the courses that the student is going to be applying for yourself. It will become very apparent to you if you look on university websites which are going to be the key skills that these subjects are going to require with a little bit of research. So it's well worth spending the time to do that to ensure that your reference is directly aligned to what the admissions tutors are going to be looking for that particular subject. It's also going to be really important to read the whole application. If you don't read the whole application and you haven't read the student's personal statement, firstly, you might miss contextual information that the student hasn't provided that would be extremely relevant for admissions tutors to know. And secondly, there could be the chance that you'd be duplicating information as well, and information that you've provided in the reference is provided elsewhere on the form, and that's a waste of spaces. Similar to the personal statement, the reference doesn't have much room for manoeuvre in terms of its length and how long it needs to be. So if you are replicating information, then it's wasted space that could be used for something more important to increase that student's chance of getting the place on the course that they want. So other considerations that you might want to make. Firstly, if you are disclosing personal matters about the student, then you're probably going to need that student's permission to do so. So make sure you obtain it and talk to them. It's always worth mentioning if the student's been involved in any widening access or gifted and talented initiatives. Remember that the reference is working in tandem and in a complementary fashion to the personal statement, so they want to be in sync and backing each other up with the information that's provided. It's going to be the space within the reference to answer any of the queries or issues that might be raised from the rest of the application as well. Remember we were saying about predicted grades perhaps being higher than prior attainment would suggest that they should be. The reference is giving you the opportunity to talk about that and comment on the student's readiness to begin that independent study in higher education, which, as I'm sure you're aware, is very, very different to learning at school or college that might have taken place before. So as a staff member at a school, there's always going to be concerns that are raised. The first one, what if you can't be positive? Now, I understand that it can be difficult if you've got a student perhaps who isn't that committed to their studies, who perhaps displays behavioural characteristics that are less than positive, and if you are really struggling to be positive about that individual within the reference, then perhaps it would be worth reflecting on whether there may be another member of staff, another individual who has a better relationship perhaps with that individual student who would be willing to write the reference. This feeds in quite well to the next concern, which is I don't know the student that well myself. That, in large schools, again, is very, very common. So it may be a case of speaking to the subject tutors about the student, speaking to the students themselves and getting to know them prior to writing the reference, or, again, maybe asking somebody who has a closer relationship with that student on the staff team to provide the reference for the individual. It's always going to be difficult if students have applied for wide-ranging subjects as well. Writing a reference for a student who has applied for engineering and drama in the same UCAS application, no matter how many times you've told them that it would be better to stick to one, is always going to be difficult. So, in that context, it would be very useful perhaps just to focus on the skills for higher education more generally that the student is going to require and those personal characteristics that we spoke about previously in the presentation. If the subject teacher response varies, which can happen, as we mentioned before, students have different relationships with their academic subjects perhaps depending on how much they like them, and also the teachers depending on their particular teaching styles and perhaps a previous relationship with student prior to studying things like GCSEs, then it may be important to focus on the responses that present the student in the best light. I'm going to say you're writing the reference for the student, so if one of the subject teachers is very complimentary and can provide some really good examples of activities that the student's engaged in that's going to look great to the admissions tutors, then perhaps it would be wisest to include those. Things to avoid on the reference include leaving loads of blank space, repeating the student's personal statement. Like I say, it needs to work in tandem. It's not supposed to be a repetition of things that they've already said. Repeating qualifications and results as well. If they're available elsewhere on the form, then you're wasting space that could be used for something more helpful to the admissions tutors that's going to increase the student's chance of obtaining a place at university. Overusing the hyperbole and the superlatives as well. It's important that, yes, whilst you present these students in the best possible light, you are also accurate and concise with the reference. So we don't want to see too much hyperbole or too many superlatives about how great these particular students are. Avoid making implausible statements or assumptions as well within the reference. That's really important. And like I mentioned before, I always avoid referring to specific universities. It's best if you're talking about readiness for university then to talk about higher education more generally than perhaps describing readiness for a particular institution. And finally, what, in your opinion, is this student's potential to succeed on the course at university? So what makes them really ready to embark on their career as an independent learner in higher education, to become an undergraduate? Do the predictions realistically reflect that potential? Are the predicted grades in line with the potential that the student has? If they're not, then why aren't they? Can you provide examples to illustrate your description of the student as well? So can you back up what you're saying with evidence that's going to make it clear to the admissions tutors that this isn't all a hyperbole or superlatives, and that it's an accurate representation of the student at the school. And reflect, does this reference add value and context to the student's UCAS application? Has this reference expanded on points that perhaps they've made in their personal statement? Does it back up other things that they might have said elsewhere in the form? And does it provide a context in which the student is making this application to university? Finally, it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. Would you be comfortable explaining what you've written if approached by a university? It's not unheard of for universities to get in touch with referees if there's some borderline cases. So would you be happy, after looking at the reference that you've just written, to have a chat about it with an admissions tutor from a university if they got in touch with you?
So I hope you found that presentation useful. Like I said before, writing the reference and writing an effective reference can really make a difference for students' applications to university. It's something that admissions tutors take incredibly seriously when they're reviewing applications, and writing a really strong one can sometimes tip the balance in the student's favour when it comes to the decision over whether or not they're going to be made an offer. So hopefully you can use all of that learning and apply it to the references that you're going to write. For someone who hasn't written a UCAS reference before, then I know the process can seem a little bit daunting at first. So hopefully this video has gone some way to allaying some of those fears and giving you some confidence in what it is that the university staff, the admissions tutors, are going to be looking for. That's it from me. Hope you found it useful. As always, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.